Growing up, I was always taught that family came first, no exceptions. That lesson was drilled into me by my grandfather, a man I deeply admired. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left me $175,000 in his will. At first, I thought it was a blessing, a token of his faith in me. But it didn't take long for that money to turn my family into a pack of ravenous wolves, faster than I could have ever imagined. The inheritance wasn't life-changing, but it was enough for a solid down payment on a home and some financial security, something I had spent years grinding toward with my business administration degree. When the will was read, the tension in the room was suffocating. My grandfather had left his house to my sister, small sums to my parents and other relatives, but the largest cash portion went to me. His reasoning was simple. To my grandson, who reminds me most of myself, use it wisely. The moment the words left the lawyer's mouth, the vultures descended. My sister, older by 3 years, was the first to strike. She and her husband wasted no time asking for $30,000 to get ahead on their mortgage. When I hesitated, her husband jumped in, spouting the same old family helps family rhetoric. Next, my parents requested $50,000 for a timeshare investment that sounded dubious at best. When I asked for a business plan, my father was outraged. "You don't trust us? We raised you," he snapped. But they hadn't put me through college. I had worked 2 jobs and taken out loans I was still repaying. Then came my uncle, cornering me at a family dinner with a proposal. He needed $100,000 for a property flipping scheme, promising I'd double my money in 6 months. It would have been tempting if I hadn't already loaned him $115,000 3 years prior, money that had mysteriously evaporated. When I brought it up, he waved it off like it was nothing. Family gatherings turned into relentless interrogations. "Have you thought about our proposal? When can we expect your contribution? Why are you being so selfish?" The exhaustion weighed on me, but nothing prepared me for what came next. One Sunday, I was invited to dinner at my parents' house, only to walk into an ambush. The entire extended family was there. After the meal, my father raised his glass with a smug smile and declared, "To family, and to my son, who is finally stepping up to help us all with his windfall." I nearly choked on my drink. "What?" My mother beamed as if this was completely normal. "We've decided how to allocate your inheritance for the family's benefit." They had decided. For my money. I shut it down immediately. "I have my own plans," I said firmly. The room erupted. My uncle called me a selfish bastard. My mother sobbed about her ungrateful child. My sister spat that I was dead to her if I didn't help with her mortgage. Then my father delivered the final blow. "Choose the money or choose us. You can't have both." I looked around at their angry faces. The same people who had never lifted a finger when I struggled through college, the same family who had ignored my hardships. Now they felt entitled to what was mine. I didn't say another word. I grabbed my jacket and walked out. The guilt-tripping texts began almost immediately. "Hope you're proud, Mother hasn't stopped crying. When you decide to rejoin this family and meet your obligations, call us. You've made a powerful enemy, boy." I ignored them all. Moved the inheritance into a secure account that required in-person verification. I wasn't stupid. I cut off contact, except for my cousin, the only family member who had never asked me for a dime. "Don't let them guilt you," she said. "They pulled the same crap on me when I got promoted." I used part of the money for a down payment on a condo and invested the rest. I changed my number, wiped my social media, and threw myself into my career. Years passed. I was promoted twice, my investments flourished, and life was good. Then, out of nowhere, my mother emailed me. "Family emergency. Please call." I didn't respond. Instead, I called my cousin. "It's a dumpster fire," she said. "Uncle's officially bankrupt. Your sister and her husband are 6 months behind on their mortgage. Your parents burned through their retirement trying to bail everyone out. Now they're all crammed into your sister's house." Still, I stayed silent. A week later, my father tracked down my work email. "Son, we're about to lose everything. We need $200,000 to consolidate debts and keep your sister's house. Time to put the past behind us and be family again." No apology. No acknowledgement of the years of silence. Just an expectation that I would swoop in and rescue them. Instead of responding, I contacted a financial advisor and a lawyer. 3 weeks later, I walked into a coffee shop where my entire family was waiting. My father had arranged the meeting through my work email. They looked rough, defeated. My sister's husband wouldn't meet my eyes. My uncle's usual bravado was gone. My mother, a shadow of her former self, looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "You came," my father said with a weak smile. "We've missed you. What do you want?" I asked, standing firm. Tears immediately welled in my mother's eyes. "We're losing everything. The bank is taking your sister's house. And that's my problem because we're family," my father insisted, as if that single word was supposed to erase everything. I let out a short laugh. "Funny. That meant nothing when you told me I was dead to you." My sister jumped in. "We were upset. We were counting on that money. Money that was never yours," I reminded her. My father leaned forward, desperate. "Look, we just need a loan. We've learned our lesson." That's when I dropped the bomb. "Actually, you don't need a loan anymore." Confusion washed over their faces. "What?" my uncle asked. "Your debts have been consolidated and purchased by a private investment group," I explained. "You'll receive formal notification next week." "What does that mean?" my mother asked, panic rising in her voice. "It means you have a new creditor with reasonable repayment terms, if you meet certain conditions." "What investment group?" my father asked cautiously. "Granite Peak Investments. And you'll need to speak with their representative." "Who's the representative?" my uncle demanded. I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. "That would be me." The look on their faces was priceless. "You bought our debts?" my father stammered. "Granite Peak did," I corrected. "A company I established 3 months ago. For years, they had seen me as nothing more than a bank account. Now they were finally forced to recognize me as something else, the man in control of their future. And for the first time, I walked away from them completely at peace. I owned the moment. Without hesitation, I handed each of them a folder containing structured repayment plans tailored to their financial situations. Reasonable interest rates, manageable payments, mandatory financial literacy courses, and quarterly check-ins. You have 1 week to review and sign. If not, Granite Peak will proceed with standard collection methods. My uncle sputtered in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You're making us pay you." "No," I corrected, meeting his glare with calm resolve. "I'm giving you better terms than any bank would. Legally, you're dealing with Granite Peak, not me. No one outside this table will know." My mother, her voice barely above a whisper, pleaded once more. "But we're family." I sighed, the words weary from repetition. "Yes. And family doesn't issue ultimatums or demand money without repayment. Family respects boundaries." As I stood to leave, my sister called out, desperation lacing her voice. "What about us? Our relationship?" I turned back, my expression unreadable. "That's up to you. The repayment has nothing to do with whether we speak. That's entirely separate." Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of liberation, not from having power over them, but from finally letting go of the need for their approval. Grandfather would have been proud. I hadn't expected my decision to resonate with so many people, but the response was overwhelming. And for those wondering, yes, they all signed the agreements. Their alternatives were far worse. The terms were fair, 5% interest compared to the 19 to 24% they had been drowning in with credit cards, with 10% of their payments going directly into mandatory savings. Payments were based on their actual income, ensuring they could realistically meet their obligations. The financial literacy component was the hardest sell. My uncle scoffed, calling it condescending, but in the end he signed. I hired a professional financial counselor to act as the face of Granite Peak. There was no way I was handling that role myself. The first 2 months were uneventful. Then my uncle missed a payment. His excuse? Unexpected expenses. The translation? Sports betting. Instead of traditional bank penalties, he was placed on bi-weekly counseling sessions, required to use a monitored budgeting app, and given a small catch-up fee. His response? An outraged email. "Is this how you treat family?" Monitoring me like a child. I didn't reply. The boundaries were clear. Meanwhile, the personal relationships remained complicated, but showed signs of evolution. My mother, in a quiet gesture of reconciliation, sent a birthday card to my office. Inside, a simple note. "I understand better now." "I'm sorry," my sister texted, admitting. "The financial counselor is actually helpful. We never learned this stuff from Mom and Dad. Thanks for that part." My father remained silent until month 5. He requested a private meeting, just the two of us, no pretense of Granite Peak. Over coffee, he looked at me with an exhaustion that made him seem a decade older. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. Your grandfather tried telling me the same things years ago, about saving, about not chasing get-rich-quick schemes. I didn't listen. I nodded. He was wise. He saw something in you that I missed. A pause. A responsibility I don't think I ever had. Not quite an apology, but the most honesty I had ever heard from him. Then, surprisingly, my uncle, after months of fighting the financial literacy program, became its biggest advocate. He even asked if Granite Peak would extend the counseling beyond his repayment period. "I'll pay extra," he admitted, almost sheepishly. My sister and her husband started marriage counseling, realizing that their financial stress had been suffocating their relationship. The structured repayment plan had given them the breathing room to address deeper issues. My cousin, always the family's outlier, visited me more frequently. One evening, she smirked and said, "Your grandfather would be proud. Not because you rescued them, but because you're making them rescue themselves." 6 months in, everyone was meeting their obligations. The savings accounts were growing. The entitlement that had once defined my family was beginning to crack, revealing the first signs of genuine accountability. Would we ever be close again? Maybe not. But we were finding a new normal, one built on reality instead of manipulation and guilt. A year later, the transformation was undeniable. My uncle, once the most resistant, was the first to complete the financial literacy program. The man who had called it condescending sent me a meticulously detailed 5-year financial plan. The counselor confirmed it was solid. Alongside it, my uncle had included a note. "I understand what your grandfather tried to teach me. I was too proud to listen. Thanks for forcing me to." My sister and her husband had stabilized their mortgage situation. When their water heater failed, they paid for repairs out of their savings, without resorting to new debt. "First time we've handled an emergency without spiraling," she admitted to the counselor. They invited me to dinner. I skipped the first invitation but accepted the second. It was awkward but not unbearable. My niece and nephew barely remembered me, but by dessert they had warmed up. As I was leaving, my sister pulled me aside. "They should know their uncle," she said softly. "If you're willing." My parents, predictably, were the slowest to change. My mother met all requirements and had even increased her savings beyond the mandatory 10%. My father paid on time but resisted counseling. Then last week, he sent me a handwritten letter. Inside were stories of my grandfather I had never heard. His struggles before building his wealth, the mistakes he had learned from. The letter ended with, "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just wanting you to know. I see now what he saw in you. What I should have seen. Not an apology, exactly. But somehow it meant more." My cousin, ever the realist, joked, "Granite Peak might be the most functional family business ever. You're literally in the business of fixing your family." She wasn't wrong. What had started as a boundary-setting exercise had turned into something more profound. I had become a distant financial mentor, guiding my family not through handouts, but through structured accountability. The real victory wasn't the money, it was the behavioral change. My uncle hadn't placed a single sports bet in 8 months. My sister and her husband had switched to cash-based spending for daily expenses. My mother, once financially reckless, had started a small craft business she'd always dreamed of. And me? I had maintained my boundaries while cautiously rebuilding connections. Monthly dinners with my sister's family, occasional coffee with my mother, sporadic emails with my uncle. My father and I still had distance, but the door, once slammed shut, was now slightly ajar. Last month, I visited my grandfather's grave for the first time since the inheritance drama. Standing before his headstone, I exhaled slowly and spoke the words I had been waiting to say. I used it wisely, just not in the way any of us expected.